Pastor K. Jones, preaching the word of Jesus, we making his name well.
Now, I want to tackle two things this morning. Number one, that reparations is not a plot against white people in general. It's not that. It is a charge against the United States of America. It's not against white people. It's against the United States of America. Because if you go about doing that, you begin to undermine some of the great supporters of the abolitionist movement, as well as great supporters of African Americans and their fight for civil rights in America. Okay, so I want to set that straight. The other thing is, there may be some people on the other side saying, how can you use the Bible to try to refute reparations when the Bible justifies slavery? Let's talk about that. The Bible, let's look at it in a few ways. The Bible never justifies slavery. God bless you, Pastor Kevin Riley. It never justifies slavery. We have to understand that. At least not in the context in which it was carried out in the U.S. When you look at the scripture and when it talks about slavery, hey, God bless you, Pastor Terrence Thomas, when it talks about slavery, when it gave the people of Israel the opportunity to gather slaves, it was because they were at war with a particular people. And watch this, it's not even in the context of their conquest of the land in which they dwelled. It was in the context of people that came out against them, and now they had to go fight and protect themselves. And in those instances, they could gather slaves. Because when you look at the context in which they went into the land of Canaan, when you look at that context, God told them, he said, you shall kill everything and everybody. So they weren't even supposed to take slaves. They were not supposed to take prisoners of war. He said, because if you take prisoners of war, they will take your heart and pull your heart away from me. And so you need to understand that I am one God and I'm the only one to be worshiped, because if you don't burn down their idols, take all their people out and tear down their altars, then they're going to turn you away from us. Right? So that was never the context in which slavery slavery in America was never justified. Now, some people will say, well, in Genesis chapter 9, what's going on, G Money? Hey, Ladora. Hey, Carol. In Genesis chapter 9, you find that Ham was cursed. No, Ham was not cursed. Ham was not cursed. Ham committed an error. And because he committed the error, now his daddy, Noah, turns around and curses his oldest son, not Ham and not the entire progeny of Ham, meaning not all of his descendants. Yes, Africans are descendants of Ham, but they were descendants of Misraim and his other son Ludum, I think it is. So they were not descendants of Canaan. Canaan was the progenitor of the people who were in the land of Canaan when Israel came in and took over the land. Those were the people who were cursed. It wasn't all of Ham's descendants. So kill that noise. Somebody may be asking, well, when you come to the New Testament, Paul, he justified slavery and telling people to submit to their masters. No, he was not talking about chattel slavery. He was talking about indentured servitude. People who, because when you look at the Roman Empire and the Greek culture, when you look at that, people submitted themselves willingly to be paid a wage for their service. And just about the entire society and the entire culture of the Roman Empire was built on indentured servitude at that time. So when he talks about slaves and he talks about servants, he is talking about people who willingly submit themselves for a contract to be paid. And then people bring back Philemon, and they say, well, Paul told Onesimus to go back and to submit to Philemon as a slave. Now, Philemon, he owned Onesimus, but watch this. Onesimus ran away because of all, hey, how you doing, Pastor Corey Robinson? Of all of the abuse that Philemon was placing upon him. And so what Paul did is he began to disciple Onesimus. Disciple Onesimus in such a way. Right. So he discipled Onesimus. He told Onesimus to go back to Philemon, and he sent a letter back with Onesimus to Philemon. And he says, now, Philemon, you need to understand that if we were talking about ownership and who owes who, you need to understand, if it all came down to it, really, you owe me your very life, because I got you out of some bonds, Philemon. You owe me your life. You really should be my slave. He says, so I'm sending Onesimus back to you, because now you need to understand that as you are a believer, you can no longer see other believers as slaves and servants to you. You can't do that, because you have to receive him as a fellow brother. So he was not sending Onesimus back to be a slave submitted unto a master. He was sending Onesimus back so he can send this letter back to Philemon and tell Philemon, hey, slavery, it really should not be so among believers. And that's why when Frederick Douglass wrote his slave narrative and wrote his autobiography, he made the statement, he said that if I ever had to go back into slavery, he said, I would not want to go back and be the slave of a Christian. He said, because the Christian slave masters were worse than the unbelieving slave masters. Why is that so? It's because the Christian slave masters had a conscience that's telling them, this is your brother. This is a person who's made in the similitude of God. And in order to cancel out that conscience of his, he had to become worse so that he can silence the conscience that was telling him this ain't right. And so, listen, the Bible does not justify slavery in one inch, in similitude to the way it was done in Great Britain and also in America. It does not justify chattel service. So when you take a human being and you put him in captivity and bondage, and you totally break down his family structure, break down his infrastructure, then what you are doing is you are taking down people who are made in the similitude of God. And that is a crime. And because that is a crime, because Africa was not at war with Great Britain. It was not at war with the people who came to this new land called America. It was not at war. And so you had no justification of bringing people over here and making them chattel servants. Not at all. And so now that's a crime. You have to pay for that crime. And that's what reparations is. Hey, this is Helen Jones, second son. Saying life is too short to play games, so keep it real. 2 fingers to the north. We out. Pow.